It's timely, it's insightful, it's motivating, it's empowering. It's Time with Fred, your inspirational broadcast with host Fred Gaddy.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Time with Fred podcast. This is a podcast that challenges mindsets and paradigms that hold us back. Podcasts can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, GooglePlay, Podbean, and iHeart. And you can also watch live on Facebook and YouTube. Today I have with me a very special guest in the person of Laura Fahrenthold, who's going to be sharing a powerful story about something that happened to her in 2009. Laura, thank you for coming on the Time with Fred podcast.
Thank you, Fred.
And will you tell us a little bit about who you are, just a brief background to our audience who are listening tonight?
Who am I? Well, I think first and foremost, I'm a mom to what I call two eyeball rolling teenagers. Professionally, I was a crime reporter for the New York Daily News for a long time, and a private investigator, a press secretary for the government and the local city government where I live, and longtime editor at Woman's World magazine. So I'm a journalist.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I just wrote a book called The PINK Steering Wheel Chronicles.
Which we're going to be hearing a bit about today.
Yes. It's published by Penguin Random House in Hatherley.
There's a powerful story behind the book. But Laura, there are moments when we all wish we could have over and over again. Sometimes moments when everything changes, right? And for you, this was that day, that fateful day of November 25th, 2009. And this was a day when your world was turned upside down. And this all happened with one phone call. What happened on that day, Laura?
Well, it's definitely the phone call that you don't want to get. And typically people say, are you sitting down? And then you think, oh dear. But I had gone out to dinner with my girlfriends and my husband was home. He had come home from work and he hadn't felt well. And it was pretty much before cell phones were attached to us at the hip. But he'd insisted upon getting me a cell phone. It was in my purse and I heard it ringing, which I can't even believe I heard it ringing because the music was really loud. And if I hadn't heard it ring, life would have been completely different. But it was him. And he said, Laura, I'm sick. Help me. And I thought, oh, God. Because he was like a big, strong guy. He was a journalist. He'd been through 9/11 and all kinds of stuff, and he never panicked, but I heard panic in his voice.
Okay.
So I raced home. I blew through traffic lights, and I knew that there was something was wrong. And I came in, and he was dying of a heart attack. So,
what did you do? I mean, when we came home and you saw him, and you had two girls at the time who were also home, correct?
Yes.
So how did that scene play out? I mean, you got home and your husband was struggling, and what did you do?
I did everything I could. I gave him CPR. I had 911 on the phone. But there was no way. Only 8% of people who have heart attacks outside of a hospital, even, they don't live. Only 8% do live. And I think it's 24% who have a heart attack in the hospital even survive. So my odds were not good at saving him. But I tried. So.
And you described the experience in your book, and I quote, you write that the deep expulsion from his lungs, he was struggling to get back on his feet. He was staggering, falling face down on the floor as he collapsed under his own weight, never to get back up. At that moment, everything stopped. The air shifted, it became lighter, it became spotty, like the dots on an old black and white TV. You felt your body being lifted, floating up the attic stairs, sort of an out-of-body experience. Your reactions to that?
It was intense. It made me a believer that, the same as when you're born, right? You enter the world, and I believe that in the same as in death, you enter a different world, because I could feel it and hear it and see it, and it was just like
And while all this was happening, your two girls were in their rooms and they were screaming, and
mm,
you told them not to come out, right? Because you didn't want them to see what was
yeah.
happening to dad. And what was going through your mind as
Yeah,
you're
there's, you know, those kinds of things that happen to us seem like they take hours, but it
Mhm.
was really only about 6 minutes before, the fire department and the paramedics and everybody came. But it was too late. I mean, he was gone the second he hit the ground.
At that moment, did you think that your worst fear might have come true at that moment when he hit the ground?
It's one of those things where I think your mind just won't, it's too much to accept at once.
Hmm.
So, I think we all hold on to hope, right?
Absolutely. You write that that night it felt like you got caught up in a time travel vortex as your spirit unknowingly willed itself to follow Mark to the hereafter. And while this lasted only a few seconds, the reality was that it took you about 4 years to return. What did you mean by that?
I think, if you're traumatized,
Hmm.
right? Um, I don't know how to explain it, but you just are a little suspended in life.
Hmm.
You don't feel like you have a full grasp. It can be overwhelming, to see a bunch of traffic coming down the street, or just to really like re-enter the world, if that makes
Hmm.
sense,
Hmm.
because everything's changed, right?
Yeah.
So
How old were your girls back then?
they were 8 and 10.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was tough. It
Did they
was,
understand what was going on with their dad?
well, I'm a big believer in just staying straight and not being like, oh, dad's playing harp with the angels in heaven. But that was the hardest thing, to tell your kids
Yeah.
that their dad was, and I said the word dead. He's dead. He's not coming back.
And sometimes kids as young as that age, some of them are not able to grasp the reality
Hmm.
of death, right? But did they understand it when you told them that? How did they react to that?
I think, they understood. They grew up with two journalist parents, and they weren't, um, they had heard different talk than maybe other families. Like if you were a doctor, you would have certain conversations, or if you were a school art teacher, whatever it is. So um, I think I think they understood, but it took us all a long time. Like when I
Hmm.
said it took us 4 years to return, but that was both literal and not.
Absolutely. And you write that when the doctors told you, this was after they'd taken him, I guess, to the hospital, and you were there, when the doctors told you that this was his friend had come, and you heard his friend crying, and you knew it confirmed your worst fears, right? And when the
Mhm.
doctors told you that he was dead, it was hard for you to believe. You described spending time talking to him, checking his pulse, and I guess wanting to validate, right? What were you trying to accomplish?
I don't really know, except that you don't want to believe,
Hmm.
right? So you need to check for yourself and be with that person, or do whatever it is. So I just wanted to spend time with him
Mm.
rather than having somebody tell me that I had to say goodbye.
Yeah,
I wanted to just be with him
yeah,
quietly.
yeah. Did you find peace at that point after that?
Um, no. Honestly, no. I mean, I think that the thing that gave me peace in looking back at it was the, if you will, like the spirit separating from the body. It's almost
Hmm.
like when you're pregnant, you have a baby, but until you give birth and it
Hmm.
becomes real. So it was like a birth.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the thing that gave me peace.
Mm-hmm. And then you and your girls got into the RV, right? And this is what your book's about. And you decided to drive 31,000 miles across the country with your late husband's ashes. What prompted that, or what was the motivation behind that?
Well, I think we're all pretty traumatized. And it was, it was really tough to be in the same house and to have to go back to school and go back to work and, have everybody checking in on you, which I really appreciated. But, it was that suspension of reality. Like you had to continue on with your life, but nothing was the same. And I didn't want his death to define them,
Mm-hmm.
to make them feel well, of course it would feel different, but like not to be victims of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be good if they got out of where we lived and if we went camping. So I was like, okay, we're going camping out west, which is something I've never done. And I was really scared, but we did it. And I brought his ashes with us because I didn't want to leave him home in case something happened, like the house burned down or somebody broke in,
Yeah.
So I brought him with us on this tent camping trip, and it ended up, it's just one of those silly little things that happened. I was walking to the outhouse in the middle of the night and I was terrified. So it's like some flannel toothless killer was waiting, So I brought the box of ashes with me, just, it was like protection or whatever. Not that he would do anything, because and then I tripped and the ashes kind of flew out. And I thought, oh gosh, he wants to get out of this box. Like I should do something with him rather than keeping him trapped in there. So it just turned out that we saw an RV on the side of the road, and I was really bad at pitching the tent, and we were wet and drowned and tired and cold, and I was so sick of cooking on the campfire and everything. So we bought this RV, and we ended up just, taking it out for almost 5 summers and traveling around the United States and Canada, and that was kind of our thing, to sprinkle his ashes in different places. But what I was doing was kind of building the girls up without them really realizing it. Like, oh, let's go climb that mountain and we'll bring dad and sprinkle him. And then they got into it. They're like, oh, we could go kayaking and sprinkle dad. And so it just became not a game, but a reason to do the trips.
Did that help bring closure to what happened?
I think it helped separate us from our, our regular lives, adventures. I always like to say that they got to climb mountains that were taller than their 6'4" dad. Yeah, closure, but also, lots of adventure, so that, when they looked back on their lives, they could be like, oh, this job interview isn't so bad. I changed an RV tire when I was 11 years old on the side of, a dirt road kind of thing. So it's kind of build them up.
Yeah. And I know this has been a while, but I imagine there's still memories, right? We just, celebrated on Father's Day. Are there memories of your husband that I'd imagine, yes, right? That continue to, that you experience, you and your girls?
I mean, absolutely. It's funny how you could show a kid a picture that they might not even remember, but then it gets logged in their brains and they do remember it. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of talking, a lot of stories that people tell, but it's, we definitely don't live in the past. We're all older now.
Yeah.
I've got one who's a senior in college, and
That's
the
wonderful.
other one is working on Tall Ships America.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. So she's a deckhand, and she became an EMT, and she wants to go to med school. So, there's a lot that's transpired between then and now.
That's awesome. Laura, I'd imagine that one's experience or one's perspective on life changes after an experience like this. How has this experience shaped your view of life, or has it at all?
It's made me realize, as cliche as this sounds, that it's important to do the things you want to do and maybe not get so hung up on money or prestige or, what the Joneses are doing. It just, it makes you look at things a lot differently. Maybe a little bit to a detriment because you can kind of see through things a little more.
Yeah.
And
so if we were to turn back the hands of time and you're reliving this, knowing that, say, in the next few days or so, your husband was there anything that you'd have done differently, knowing that this was inevitable?
That's a good question. I might have appreciated him a little more, because you never think that your husband helps with the housework or, whatever. And then I realized he actually did do stuff. Like, I hate taking the garbage out. I hate shoveling the snow. So do the girls. So and they used to do when they were little, it was so cute. So we take all the mats out of the cars and we lay them over the snow so we don't have to shovel. Things like that. But I think it's human nature to take for granted. You think that you're going to go to bed at night and everything will be the same in the morning. And it ain't true. So there's one thing that, all the old ladies say is you never go to bed angry.
That's right.
They're right. Because you think about those last things you said to your loved one and imagine if they weren't polite.
You touch on this important point, Laura. I was taping last week's episode of my podcast, and it was about anger. And I taped that from a point of reflection, right? Considering the anger that so much filled our society from everything that's happened, and even down to our individual lives. A friend of ours who we've known, great family that we've known for a while, had some challenges, and relationship really was just had to end, all because of anger, right? One party just uncontrolled anger, and it was just one after the other, and it got to a point where the wife had to just separate. And it's, in hindsight, he realized it, and he was trying to reconcile and calling back, but a lot of harm had been done. But you talk about not going to bed while it's angry, and it reminds me of the scripture that says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. I think it's Ephesians 4:26 and 27. It says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. I think there's a lot of value in that, right? Especially as it relates to personal lives, right? Because you just don't know what tomorrow may bring, right? Does that make sense?
Exactly. Just, your daily interactions with people, if you're upset with a cable company or, whatever it is, I think when people beep their horns on a Sunday morning, if you don't move your car in like 2 seconds at the stoplight, I think we all just need to take a breath.
Yeah.
So that's what I learned, is just, to take a breath, take a pause, and look around you and see what you have. And water it or weed it, but, do something.
Yeah. And imagine, Laura, there are so many fragile relationships, right? Whether it's a spousal relationship, parents and kids, and, folks not talking to each other, and holding anger, right? Not knowing, what tomorrow holds. Knowing, given what you experienced, right? I mean, you lived it. I mean, you didn't know that this was going to happen. There's probably someone listening to this right now, Laura, who maybe relationships that are severed, or families that aren't talking. What words of wisdom would you want to pass on to perhaps someone listening to this podcast or watching us right now? What do you say? I know you kind of touched on it, but I think people need to hear it, right? It's one thing just knowing. I mean, there's that realization, but what would you tell them? I mean, you've lived through it, right?
You always hear about how people get back together on the deathbed. You go visit the parent that you had the falling out with, or, we go to people's funerals, right? But we haven't seen them in 15 years. Why do we do that? I think we should, go make an effort to keep your relationships, right? And if there's a problem with one, I mean, I've done it. I was the bigger person in a relationship, um, with a family member. And I was so scared to go to this wedding because I knew she would be there, but I just walked up to her and I hugged her and I wouldn't let her go. I just kept hugging her. And within a couple of minutes, we were both bawling, and now we're friends.
It takes one person, right, to be the big person, right? It takes one person to take that step. Perhaps sometimes it's a feeling of pride. I don't want to show my weak side, but it takes one. And in this case, you decided to be that bigger person, and saying, look, I don't care what's happened in between us. I'm going to go ahead now. How difficult was that for you to be that big person, to be the one to initiate that attempt at reconciling or extending that olive branch, so to speak?
Well, we can all, I think it's all ego, right? So if you put your ego aside, and I'm not saying I'm always the big person, but in that particular instance, something had to give. And I knew that I had to be the one to give in order to, unfracture this relationship.
Yeah.
So,
And how did that make you feel? How did that make you feel
I still get
afterwards?
tears in my eyes now. Yeah. I mean, it's, we just have to be kinder to each other. It sounds so snappy and silly, but we do. I mean, look at everything we're going through now.
Yes.
Is a nation. It's.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on exactly, that, right? There's so much fragmentation. There's so much anger. And for all the right reasons. I want to be careful. There's divisions and injustice. And I do understand that we have to cry for, or we have to fight for injustice and stand for what we believe is right. But underneath all that, or behind all that veneer, there's a lot of hatred. There's a lot of, what are we to do, right? I mean, here you are. We're living this. I mean, I haven't met you. I read your story and I was so inspired by it, and I reached out to you, and you agreed, and I want to say thank you for that. But I think that's really how the healing starts, right? I mean, in spite of what folks may be going through, in spite of what the underlying, it takes that one person to build this bridge. Because again, coming back to the story, which we're not digressing from, but life is fragile, right? It's not guaranteed to any one of us. They say yesterday was what is it saying? Today is not, tomorrow is not guaranteed. Tomorrow is a promissory note, right? We don't know whether it's going to be available to us or not. So the only opportunity we have really is today, right? So how do you live life now, Laura? I mean, you've had a lot of, I guess, wisdom and experiences from what happened, but what's your philosophy in life, Laura? If I can ask you that question.
That's a good question, Grasshopper. I don't know. Good question. What's yours?
My philosophy, it's changed really over the years, because they're depending on what stage of life in which you are. Um, but mine's really, is to live in the moment, is to appreciate who you have, right? I mean, this whole COVID-19 experience, and you see people who've died, and the job losses and all of that, and it's really to be thankful, right? It's not perfect, but I'm thankful for today. I'm thankful for the little things, right? For the ability to wake up in the morning and just breathe, because I try to put things in perspective and realize that not everyone has it that way. I have a family. I have, wife and two adorable kids, and there's love. We love each other. Things may not be perfect. We have our own challenges. There are things that are happening all around us, but we try to be thankful. We try to be grateful for what we have. and try to make the most out of it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in this moment, that's what it is. It may change a year from now depending on where we are, but for the season in which I am right now,
Mm-hmm.
that's my philosophy.
I like that word, the season. I mean, hopefully good comes out of COVID and that we've all pretty much been stripped of what we know, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe this will help us be more family oriented and, not as materialistic as we can all tend to be
Yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah.
So,
And that's that perspective, right? I mean, we can focus on all the bad things that are happening, and again, not to downplay anything. I mean, there a lot of people have died, and people are still, catching this. People are still not, in the hospital. But in spite of all that's going on, what good can we find out of that, right? And that's how I see things. I'm the glass, half full kind of guy. I'm realistic, but I try to see things from a different perspective, right? I try to, okay, what can we learn out of this, right? What good can come out of this? And a lot of good things have. I mean, we're not seeing it because, of course, all we're hearing about is the bad stuff, right? That's media, but there's a lot of good things, and that's that perspective. But one question, Laura, that I like to ask everyone I talk to is what defines you now, right? Having experienced life and things that a lot of people have not experienced. What would you say defines you?
well, I do have to say, I don't look at the glass as half full. I look at it as completely empty.
Hmm.
I
Why is
do.
that?
I just do. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a half glass full person. I look at it as empty and what can I put in it to
Hmm.
fill it up?
That's another powerful perspective that I hadn't thought about before.
I mean, I might be a little negative, maybe a little snarky, maybe a little jaded, maybe a little hurt, all of those things. So I'm not, I mean, I'm definitely a fun, optimistic, I'm a go get 'em girl, but I, I'm not, tiptoeing through the tulips, if
Mhm,
that makes sense.
mhm.
Yeah.
So seeing the glass as empty brings the best out of you, right? This is
Yeah.
empty. What can I do to? I like that. I like that. I mean, I don't see that as negative at all because sometimes the opposite is also always also true. If it's empty, if it's half full, there's a little bit of water in here, so I'm okay, right? But if you see it as empty, then it brings out the best in you. I like that perspective. Thanks for teaching me that lesson. I didn't think about it that way.
Well, I never really put that into words until you asked me the philosophy. And I'm like, I wonder what that is. And I can't, the glass is empty.
Yeah.
But today it's a little full. There was a mouse that got into the garbage can, right? Like it
Hmm.
was in the garbage can. And my friend wanted to, get rid of it. I said, oh, don't do that. Let's just put it back in the yard. And I'm really afraid of mice. I don't like them.
I don't either.
Oh my God, I mean, I have glue traps at home and I'm like, whatever. But up here in the country, I said, let's just let him go. So we let him go. And I felt kind of good about that. And guess what? He came back to the garbage can today.
It's a motivated mouse. It
It's a
doesn't give up
motivated
easy. Yeah.
mouse. But I felt so much better by not making it, go bye-bye. Right? So I mean, the mouse has a purpose, and that is to be let go, run back wherever he's going, get back in the garbage can. He's got something to say. So he filled my glass today. I kind of fell in love with him.
Interesting perspective. I'm hearing all sorts of things today that I hadn't thought about before. Bringing us back though, what defines you? What has defined you? What keeps you going? What gets you up in the morning, and what keeps you going in spite of all that's happened in the past?
Well, what gets me up in the morning? Good question. I mean, it's not really work. I think it's just to see what happens.
Yeah.
right? You see what happens with the day. I'm not a big career person anymore. I gave all that up. Not that I'm loaded. In fact, I'm not. Um, it's more about experiences with people now. Like I started an Airbnb at my house because I wanted to just be around other people and see what they had been through in life and what they do and what they bring with them, and just learn from them. So I did that for about 3.5 years. And that definitely got me up and cleaning. So it's much slower now. My husband was a big journalist at Bloomberg News, who was in the middle of suing the Federal Reserve during the housing crisis because they weren't opening the bailout books, that they had earmarked money from taxpayers to bail banks out in the event that banks went bankrupt. And they wouldn't reveal the information, even though they're supposed to, because of something called FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. So he ended up suing them through Bloomberg, and the case went up to the Supreme Court, where it was being fought because they didn't want to reveal the information. And that's when my husband had died, major stress. So after that, I was just like, work stress, not so great.
Yeah.
There are other ways you can do it, and still have enough to pay your taxes and, put food on the table and everything without killing yourself.
Yeah. And you talk about work stress or just stresses from life in general. And we all are like, we work hard and we're trying to, you talked about keeping up with the Joneses. We want to check all the boxes. But in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, you've lived it. You've led that busy life, and your husband lived it too. And now you're just living, right? So as we bring this to an end here, what's important to you now, I mean, in life? What brings you satisfaction in life now? I mean, you're winding down and just enjoying life. What's important when it comes to life, or what should we be concerned about, really, in life?
I wish I had those answers. I don't know. Whatever it is that you really enjoy doing, I guess, and taking time to do those things.
Yeah.
We're all affixed to our screens and, we've gone digitally insane, and everyone's like,
Yeah.
So I sound like an old lady, but I like gardening now. And we have pet chickens, just simple things, building a campfire up at the cottage that I'm at, seeing friends.
Yeah.
We all got together last night and I made socially distanced, fried chicken and apple crisp. Like I would have never done that before. Right?
Just enjoying life, right?
Yeah, I think the one thing I always love to say is that the big things are the little things in disguise.
Yeah. I totally agree. Laura, where can our audience find your book? I know it's on Amazon, right? I mean,
it is. It was in people.com. It was featured 3 days ago, which was so exciting. And it's published, I said, by Penguin Random House, the Pink Steering Wheel Chronicles. It's on Amazon and local bookstores, whatever. And then my second book, the Airbnb Chronicles, is coming out in April. So that's really fun because it's like a look inside of an Airbnb and these people's lives and all the cool things they've done and how that affected our home.
Laura, thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing your story. I mean, I can see there's not a lot of pain. There's not a lot of anger, right? You're certainly taking life as it comes, and I like the lightheartedness, albeit not that things are always easy, but just the opening up and sharing your story. I know a few people who've actually been through this, and it's never easy. I haven't been through it, so I can only imagine what it feels like. But but I'm sure someone who's watching who may have experienced this has gotten a few nuggets, some inspiration, some timely lessons out of this. And
Hopefully.
I want to say thank you for coming on, and we'll definitely check out your book. I read an excerpt on Amazon. I'm going to go ahead and get it, so I want to get a full story. Now I'll keep an eye out for the next one as well. But if you're watching, listening, Laura Fahrenthold, her book's out there on Amazon. You want to read the whole story, definitely check it out. And until we come your way next time with another edition of Time with Fred, thanks for tuning in.